RotoGrinders Today. I'm Jordan Cooper, a.k.a. BlenderHD, BlenderHD. If you want to follow me on Twitter. And it's Monday, June 3rd. We'll be taking a look at the 8-game MLB slate on tap for us tonight. 1, 2. Yeah, they're all at the same 6:40 p.m. Eastern. Seems like DraftKings doesn't mind the slightly earlier start times, which is a good thing. I like when they include those games. And because it's Monday, obviously we're bringing the guy that alliteration it matches on Monday. Mondays with McCool. It's James McCool, the co-author with me on the Theory of Daily Fantasy Sports 15-hour audio DFS masterclass. You can pick up at theoryofdfs.com. If you want to learn the game theory of DFS, this is the best place to go. Pick up both courses and the custom Excel tools that you could use to build lineups kind of the same way that I do. So theoryofdfs.com. But James, we got baseball today. You said before the show it's the beginning of June, right? We had April, we had May. We said this even when the season started, right? The beginning of April, the end of March, we're like, can't believe baseball's back, baby. Baseball's back. The best time. Baseball. It's Monday, June 3rd. You've already hit the. I think I made a bet with you, James, of what that point was when you're like, when does football come?
Yeah.
I think the under hit because before the show you were like, yeah, it's Monday, June 3rd. You're getting sick of baseball.
No, I mean, I am not sick of talking about baseball. I'm doing pretty well in terms of like my burnout on baseball content. And it might be because I'm writing 4 times a week this year when I didn't produce any written content last year. So I think that because I am doing more content on it this year, I'm feeling a little bit like, I don't know, more engaged maybe. I'm not sure. But I still feel pretty good. Doing a lot of betting. That's mostly what I'm focusing on right now. And that's something that we have talked about now for months. Is where both of us kind of see that there's more edge right now in props in terms of making money. So there's a little bit more focus there for me, but still looking at the DFS stuff. I still play pretty much every time there's the 190Q for the Fantasy World Baseball Championship. I play that. I play the 13Q. I'll get in the 250 every once in a while if I have time, but yeah, I'm not super burnt out right now, and I feel like the season has been going pretty well. Things have made sense, and yeah, I'm not burnt out. I feel pretty good.
Well, will you be burnt out by playing Kevin Gausman today at 8,000, and then watching him either? What's going to happen tonight is either you play Gausman at 8K. And he gives up 7 runs in 4 innings, or you don't play Kevin Gausman today, and he goes 7 innings and strikes out 10. Who's the real Kevin Gausman?
The real Kevin Gausman is really good, and I have stats that I use to look at kind of what we expect a pitcher to be moving forward. I use things called true average and different regressive stats, and his weighted true average in this matchup is terrific. So his true average against left-handed hitters is 134. His true average against right-handed hitters is 221. So there's a pretty large deviation there. And he's projected to face 6 left-handed hitters in this lineup. So he has a really good spot, all things considered, up against a bunch of lefties. But that doesn't necessarily mean much from a fantasy perspective, right? Like I expect him to give up less hits, but what does he do if he doesn't give up a hit? And Baltimore is one of the lower strikeout rate teams in the league. Granted, they don't walk a lot, so that's nice for a pitcher's floor. But like from a strikeout perspective, their strikeout numbers are not super duper high. I think they're bottom 5 in strikeout rate. So it's kind of up and down, but Kevin Gausman's price at 8K kind of mitigates the lower ceiling that I would expect from him based on the strikeout rates here. And on the other side of that, you know, when we're looking at the prices of all these pitchers, it's like above him, the only guy that I feel like playing would be Tarek Skubal. Like I just don't see much of a reason to pay up for Zach Wheeler, even though I think that he will likely be, you know, obviously a popular option. But 10.7K, I think that there's probably not a big difference in upside between Kevin Gausman and Zach Wheeler. So it's like, if I can save the $2,700, I'd rather do that. So that's a long way of saying I think Kevin Gossman is certainly underpriced in this spot based on the prices that we have available on the slate. And I think he's probably purely from a do I think that he is going to give up a lot of hits and damage perspective, he's the best pitcher on the slate.
Okay, but I mean, these aren't the greatest of matchups. I mean, from a power perspective, I mean, obviously the Orioles have power. Wheeler's facing the Brewers. The Brewers have power. They have more strikeouts though in their lineup. Scooble, same thing for Texas. Like Texas has power. He's down in Texas all day, so it's a little bit warmer down there. The other guy in that range, like we have multiple. I mean, to me, this is seems like a pretty decent pitching slate because you also have Verlander at 8,800 against St. Louis, which that's a pretty decent matchup. You also have Mackenzie Gore at 9K against the Mets, and that isn't like the worst thing in the world. And then obviously we have some cheaper pitchers. You have Grayson Rodriguez 9,400 against Toronto. That's not the greatest of matchups either. You say you feel more comfortable with Scooble and Gausman as a combination on DraftKings. Based on the ownership that I'm looking at, it doesn't seem like. Do you think I mean, obviously there's a first look. It's 11 o'clock in the morning. The slate doesn't start for nearly 7 hours. You still have to get lineups in, and you never know what's going to happen. I know that you said you prefer Scooble plus Gausman, but do you think there's any of these pitchers that we just mentioned are going to get outsized ownership? Because I have the bat ownership up, and all like Wheeler's 33, Verlander 22, Gausman 22, Gore 22, Scooble 26. Grayson Rodriguez is probably the odd man out, 13. Do you think any of these pitchers, just by the end of the day, like Wheeler ends up being 40+% owned, or Scooble ends up being 40%? Like anyone gets up to, this is an 8-game slate, so yeah, 20% ownership is not like that much ownership when you have to roster 2 pitchers on DraftKings. But as of right now, I get the sense that people would be less likely to play Mackenzie Gore against the Mets. So maybe he doesn't come in at 22. But I'm not sure if, like, I think people are more likely to play Wheeler than Scooble, right? But is it going to be so much so that it's 33-26 rather than 42-14? Because then if that's the case, then I'd be with you with, comparing both of the pitchers. I think Wheeler has the highest pitch count. Like, he could go 110 pitches if they want him to. Scooble isn't going to do that. So I'll have to rank Wheeler above Scooble, but you tell me that one's going to be 3 times more owned, then I'll be more on your side. So what do you think the field is going to do with a lot of these pitchers?
Well, 2 things. I mean, one, I don't really care so much about a pitch count difference of 8 pitches between Wheeler and Scooble projected, right? Like if you were to tell me that Wheeler had an outsized pitch count of 102 versus Scooble being at like 82, it's like, okay, yeah, sure, I'll use that as a tiebreaker. But mostly what it's just going to come down to is like, I think that realistically you can project them about the same if you'd like to. I do not have them projected about the same. I have Scooble as a heavy lean over Wheeler. But as far as the field, I think the field looks at Milwaukee as a strikeout heavy lineup. I think they look at Wheeler as the best pitcher and like the main ace on this slate. I think people look at Texas and think of power. And I think people look at Scooble and think that it's the Detroit Tigers. So 1, there's that piece of it. And 2, there's a $200 difference, and you can't really afford both of them reliably on this slate. It's a Coors slate, so people are going to pick one of the 10K pitchers if they play a 10K pitcher. I'm not even sure that people are going to play a 10K pitcher. But when you look at those things combined, I think that what you're going to see is Zach Wheeler probably twice as owned as Tarek Skubal. I think Wheeler's probably going to be the highest owned pitcher on the slate at 35 or so % owned, and Tarek Skubal is going to be something like 15, maybe 20% owned. I don't even think he's going to hit 20% because people aren't going to be able to afford it. People are going to stack. They're going to use Wheeler plus Cincinnati plus Waldron, probably either Waldron or Miguel. And we'll talk about Miguel here in a second. But like people are going to go Wheeler plus Miguel plus a Cincinnati stack And then they're going to use a couple one-offs from high upside teams, right? I don't think that it's going to be. I don't think you can reliably use both Skubal and Wheeler, and if people are going to choose one, it's going to be Wheeler.
Right. Well, the thing about double barreling at pitcher today, boy, the offensive totals on this slate are really low. Right. I mean, you take a look across the board. I mean, more than half the teams have less than a 4 implied team total. I mean, because the pitching is pretty decent today. The outsized teams that are above that are obviously the Coors game with the Reds and the Rockies. I guess the Astros against Kyle Gibson. The Padres, even the Padres are not even at 4.5. Yeah, like offense. I mean, the Nationals 4.38. I mean, that isn't that high either. And people don't like your pronunciation. Isn't it supposed to be Tyler McGill rather than Megill? Megill, does it matter? I pronounce the hockey names wrong all the time, and people get on my case about that. They know who we're talking about.
Yeah. As long as that's all that matters. You just know who we're talking
about. On the low end, Waldron versus McGill or Megill, if you want to call him that. I think they're going to be obviously the two, like, if you're going to play a high price pitcher and a low price pitcher, I think those are the two options. Especially like CJ Abrams is not going to be in the Nationals lineup. I mean, that Nationals lineup is looking pretty thin. But you could say the same thing about the Angels. And do you have a preference, Waldron over McGill? Because the bat fairly decently prefers Waldron. And actually, I have a Tyler McGill prop that I've taken on FanDuel, which is under 16.5 outs at -104. That doesn't mean, hey, McGill could pitch 5 innings and still at 7,200 put up 15 points. So, like, just because I bet the 16.5 under outs doesn't necessarily mean he pitches poorly. Do you think they should be close? I mean, like, your attitude with the Skubal Wheeler is that your projections in your model has Skubal above Wheeler, which is going to be like kind of contrarian to the field. Right now, we have McGill slightly lower projected but higher owned. So what are you doing with these two guys?
I have McGill projected for 0.2 fantasy points more than Waldron. Coin flip, just straight up coin flip. Okay. I like both of them a lot. I think they are both really, really good plays today. I'll take the drastic over on 12 fantasy points on McGill. I also have overs on his strikeouts. So I really, really like McGill. It's hard for me to trust Waldron because he throws a knuckleball. And I know that's silly, but like, it's so hard for me to see an 11.42 K per 9 over the last month for a pitcher that has a knuckleball. It's weird. I think it comes back down to earth, just from like the things that I know about baseball. Typically knuckleballers are contact guys and not really super high strikeout guys. So it's weird that I have him projected so well. I have both him and McGill projected very, very well. You can use either. I think that both are in really good spots. Obviously the Angels are without Mike Trout and clearly don't have Shohei Ohtani anymore. They don't have a lot of reliable power. They do have power. Joe Adell does have power. They do have some guys in that lineup. Like Logan O'Hoppe, when he's in the lineup, he has some decent power. There's guys that are not terrible in that Angels lineup, but like they are not necessarily a great team. They are a not reliable team. Washington, I actually think, is a little bit better than public perception, even without CJ Abrams. Abrams has struggled over the last month, and they have still been an offense that is able to put up some runs. So I don't think that either one of these are absolute cakewalk matchups, but I do think that both of these pitchers have a lot more upside than their prices on DraftKings. Like these guys are, I would think about 1,000. It's weird because I think that Wheeler is probably $1,000 overpriced. Megill, Waldron, and Gossman are $1,000 underpriced. So I kind of look at those guys, and that's where I want to put my money. I don't know that you need to or even consider going above. Like, do you even consider Grayson Rodriguez at 9,400? Like, why do you go?
If he's 5% owned, I mean, to me, you know me.
No,
it's
sure.
To ownership, and even like Danny Chen asks, we missed one cheap pitcher, even cheaper. I'm not a Ryan Nelson guy. I can just tell you, I typically play bats against Ryan Nelson than play him, but he's 5,800 and he's facing the Giants, and I don't think he has necessarily has. I'm going to say doesn't have the upside, but he's 5,800. How much upside does he really need? But I don't think Nelson's the guy that puts up 20 plus fantasy points today. And I think with all the pitchers that are available on the slate, I don't like. What are you paying up for? Like, let's say you play Ryan Nelson and Gausman at 8K, and you're not paying up for Scooble or Wheeler. Like, you're just gonna overpay for a stack that's in a bad spot. I mean, like, what?
No, you're not. You're not. You're gonna stack Coors. You're gonna stack the only teams that have 13 goals.
The whole game.
Yeah, you're just gonna stack the only environment that has good run totals.
But I mean, you don't even need. But the thing is, you don't even need to. Like your prices. Like, you can play Gausman plus Waldron and still play a stack of this game. Now, would you be able to get Ellie De La Cruz and Ryan McMahon and Elias Diaz and Spencer Steele? No, you're not gonna be able to get all the expensive players, but you could get most of. I mean, if you want to play the Reds. I mean, you got Martini, you got some 4K guys to play, and the Rockies are even cheaper. The Brendan Rodgers is 3,400, Montero's 3,300. I mean, you can play the Rockies with Scooble or Wheeler. So I just don't feel as if the double dip on the bottom. I don't think unless you want to overpay for the Astros, right? If you want to overpay for the Astros, or you want to overpay for the then the Padres aren't even that expensive anymore. So I don't even consider. If you want to maybe pay up for the Diamondbacks, and even they're not that expensive anymore. I mean, let's just what am I paying for? I'm looking at you're paying for the Orioles against Gausman. So you're going to play Gunnar Henderson, Rutschman, Mountcastle type of lineups with a 3.75 implied.
No. I mean, it's pretty clear that if you're going to play Ryan Nelson, you use it to stack Coors. That's what you do. And I have written up Ryan Nelson a couple starts in a row in the newsletter. And but look, Ryan Nelson is not a strikeout guy, but he can go deeper into games. So what you're hoping for if you play Ryan Nelson is for 15 fantasy points and that he just doesn't kill you. I don't think.
And also, Coors needs to go off. It needs to be a 11. 10 type of game.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that you need to go to Ryan Nelson. I think that if I was going to have 150 lineups, or if I had 100 lineups in the flagship, I would have some. I'd match the field. Maybe I'd have 5% or something like that. But only because he is cheap, and if what you need is a full out stack of Coors plus Kyle Tucker, that's how you get there. Is you go with Ryan Nelson with Waldron or something, right? But in the 250 or in the 121, I'm not playing Ryan Nelson. I have no reason to go down that low. And it purely keys on Kevin Gausman is only $8,000, and I don't need to spend
those words. That James, the more that you're confident about Kevin Gausman, the less you should be confident.
I'm not confident in the outcome, but you can't look at me and tell me that he's an 8K pitcher.
No, I agree. No, I agree with you. But just to make things clear for the audience, it's like Kevin Gausman, 8K, lock him in. Nothing could go wrong. It's Kevin Gausman. Everything could go wrong. And also, Marty has a more important question, James. How often does Coors really hit on the first day?
It's a myth. It's a myth. I mean,
is that the BVP? Is that the BVP of Coors? Is that because that is a narrative that that teams go into court, because the reason why this narrative exists in DFS is because of the sites. Yeah. It's because of DraftKings and FanDuel. DraftKings historically, especially when coming off of whoever does their weekends, whoever works their ops team on weekends, just forgets that like a team that the visiting team is going into Coors like on the next day, and then doesn't price the game appropriately.
Right.
So what ends up happening in DFS is that the first game in Coors is like the lowest priced that it should be, which means more people play Coors because it's underpriced. And then the outcome is the same range of outcomes that it would normally be. And you just tend to remember, hey, I remember I played underpriced Coors and it didn't hit.
Mhm.
And then you just remember those times and don't remember the times that it hit. And it's only because of price. I mean, we see that in every sport where the difference of like if Kevin Gausman was 10-5 on this slate, the same price as Scooble and Wheeler, he would be like 10% owned today. Right? He would
Yeah.
be like you would look and go, he's obviously the third person. I'd rather you'd say Scooble than Wheeler than Gausman, right? Or
No, I
something like
wouldn't.
that.
I would say Scuball, then Gossman, then Wheeler.
Than Wheeler, okay. But you wouldn't be like, oh, you got to play Gausman because he's 10-5 and he's great. It's like, no, he's 8K and he probably should be like 9,200.
Right.
Like the other two are priced where they should be, and the projections show that they're probably priced where they should be. So it's not it's Gausman is going to be owned today. So if Gausman gets killed, people are going to be like, can never play. They're going to put him on their never play again list. But if Gausman was 12K today and he did poorly, people would just make fun of the 3% of people that played Gausman at 12K.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and that's just what it comes down to is people pushing these kind of narratives. Look, there's something to be said about it. It's kind of like the BVP thing, where there's probably some sort of effect, but we can't quantify it. So we don't measure it and we don't rely on it in terms of projections. Going for, I do think that there is something to be said about the difference of coming out of a Coors environment and going into a regular hitting environment. I think that it is less pronounced going into Coors than going out of Coors. Mostly just because that there are physics in terms of the way that breaking balls act at altitude. And I think that if you were going to look at it and form a narrative around it, you wouldn't form the narrative that guys going into Coors on the first day do worse. You would think that they should do exceptionally better. And fun fact, the data actually bears that out. Most of the first games in Coors actually do exceed what we would expect them to be. But then when you go out of Coors, you wouldn't expect to go into Coors and have balls that are easier to hit on breaking balls and say, oh, the under is going to hit, right? Like you don't expect that. What you should build a narrative around is say, oh, a team is now going out of Coors where breaking balls are going to act normally after they have been dealing with breaking balls that move on average 6 inches less on horizontal and vertical movement. They would be moving functionally 6 inches more going out of Coors, right? So it would be harder to hit. So that would be the narrative that I would build if I was a person who builds narratives, but I'm not. So I just trust the projections and it'll bear out over time. I think that to your point about Gossman, if he was 10-5 on the slate, like that would make the slate really, really good. Because then people would actually have to choose between 3 pitchers that like if Gossman, Wheeler, and Scuball were all 9,500, this slate would be awesome because somebody somewhere, whether it be here or over at Skotastic or wherever, whatever site, would be like, no, this is the guy that we have to play. And then one of those 3 guys would be like 35% owned. The other 2 would be 10% owned. And it's like, man, the people who played the 35% owned guy were just freaking wrong. So that would make it awesome. But instead, we're going to have Zach Wheeler be way over-owned and Scuball be under-owned. And I don't even really want to play Scuball because 10.5K is expensive on this slate. So I'm just going to eat a bunch of chalk with Kevin Gossman and Tyler McGill, or however you pronounce his last name, I think, and then just move on. And I'm going to eat so much chalk today, man. My lineups are going to be so chalky.
Well, the thing is with Gausman, even though like these are the bad projections, like, and I bet the bad projections. Like I may be playing Gausman today in DFS, but I also have 2 home run props out against it. So I have O'Hearn, basically the lefties, basically O'Hearn at plus 850 and Mullins at plus 1100 on Caesars. I mean, they're low percentage, obviously, plus 800, 815, plus 1100. And that also depends on whether or not Mullins. What happened to Cedric Mullins? He's gonna fell off the face of the earth.
Yeah, that's a weird one.
But yeah, the lefties against Gausman for power, right? It's not necessarily for batting average or OBA or whatever, but power wise, I'd prefer the lefties. But let's get into the stacks, right? And I steal from Dean because all great artists steal. By doing the tiers. So going through all the teams on today's slate, this is adjusted for ownership. Okay. So just because a team projects well doesn't necessarily make them an A stack. And these are stacks, which means we're talking about five guys from a team. We're talking DraftKings stacks, 4 at minimum. So 4 or 5 if you want to do that. So if there's a team that's like, well, I'd play one-offs from the team, but I wouldn't play the stack. Well, that's why the stack is rated so low. Okay, so just because the stack is low doesn't mean you can't play anyone from the team. So let's start at the top, point per dollar wise, in the back projections. The Colorado Rockies against Andrew Abbott. Where would you put them?
I'd put them in A. Personally, I couldn't.
Do you think? No, I put them in A also. I mean, we don't have to explain like every single one. I mean, we have 16 teams to go through. I would place the Rockies in A over the, like, we went to the Reds. Like, the Reds would be B, and primarily because I think the Reds are going to be more owned than the Rockies.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I would have, just based on that with ownership, I do think that the Reds are going to have twice as much ownership as the Rockies. So I agree that Rockies A, Reds B. But if this was a bigger slate, because we only have 16 teams here, but if this was a bigger slate, I'd just put both of them in A. Because I think both would be under-owned. So
do you think the Red? Do you think that more people? Do you actually think people are gonna play other teams more so that the Reds, even at the highest owned team, is going to be the lower owned than they? I get the sense that so many people are going to look at the slate and go, "I'll choose 2 pitchers and maybe out of a bunch of them," and like, I think people are going to look and go either play Cincinnati or Colorado. I don't think people are going to go, I'm going to play a Padres Tigers lineup. Like, I just
no. I think the Reds will be the highest owned team by far, only because we have only 16 teams. This is a relatively small slate, and the pitchers are so accessible that, like, it's easy to afford them. So I think the Reds are going to be overowned. So yeah, I agree with Rockies A, Reds B.
How about the San Francisco Giants against Ryan Nelson? They have a low projection, but they're really cheap.
I'd put them in like D. I'm just not into that. They don't have power. I think Ryan Nelson has some regression coming to help him out. Like, they're not going to win you a GPP tonight.
Also, even if you play like a cheap 5-man like Giant stack, like, what are you paying up? It gets to the point of like that would be the stack you do if you're playing like Wheeler plus Scooble. And then just hope the Giants put up enough runs. Like, that's old school vomit stacking. And I don't think we live in it with pitching the way it is in 2024. We don't live in old school vomit stack world.
No, and even if I wanted to have a cheaper option, I would just stack the Rockies, who are cheaper than the Reds.
Right. How about the Padres against Tyler Anderson? They project pretty decently, and they're not as expensive as they used to be, but maybe there's a reason for that.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think that the Padres suck, but like on this slate, I think they're fine. I'd probably put them in C. I think.
Yeah, I could deal with that.
Yeah, between B and C, I'll lean C only because I don't think they're very good. But yeah, I mean, C is probably fine.
How about the Nationals against Tyler McGill? They actually project, like you said before, the Nationals may not be as bad as, even though C.J. Abrams is in the lineup, they aren't as bad as you think. I know you probably have McGill higher projected than the Bat does, but the Bat projects him well and projects the Nationals. I mean, it has the Nationals projection on a very similar to some other pretty decent teams.
Yeah,
in bad matchup. Decent teams in bad matchup. That's the thing.
Right. I have Washington projected very, very low. I have their average score in game sims at just 3.5. So It's pretty
Do
low.
you have here, James? Do you have them lower than the Rangers or the Brewers or the Tigers or the Cardinals or the Angels?
Yes, yes to all of those. The only teams that I have them above are Toronto and Baltimore. Now, I mean, Toronto and Baltimore obviously have really tough matchups. So,
right.
But that being said, I do think, if we go through the day and Tyler McGill ends up with outsized ownership, if he wins that ownership battle between him and Waldron, I could see Washington being a decent leverage stack. If you're going to stack the Reds and then not have Miguel, like, here's what I would do. In large field, you would go something like Wheeler with Waldron, Cincinnati, and then a Washington secondary, right? To leverage the people who have Wheeler, McGill, and Cincinnati. And that gives you a lot of relative value to pass the field. So I'll put them in C, just because I do think they offer really, really good leverage on the field.
Do you think would you rather, if you get given the choice, would you rather play the Nationals against a chalky-ish, cheaper McGill, or the Angels against a chalkier, cheaper Matt Waldron? It seems like you think that the knuckleball is going to fail more than McGill fails.
Yeah, I'm happy to put the Angels in C as well for the exact same reason that I just mentioned with Washington. It just depends on who ends up winning that ownership battle between Waldron and McGill. I think Washington and the Angels are exactly the same play for exactly the same reason.
Here's a team that I think is going to go under-owned today. The Arizona Diamondbacks against Spencer Howard. And they project very similarly to some of the better teams obviously not Coors, but outside of Coors, they're one of the top projected teams outside of Coors. I can't put them in A because I still think I'd rather play the Rockies at their ownership. But would you at least consider them a B stack?
No. Well, no, I'd consider them a C stack. Look, I just think that the bullpen matters a lot in this instance. And the bullpen for the Giants is not terrible. I just don't think if you're stacking up Arizona makes a better secondary stack for me. I don't really want to do like a full stack with them. I just think that gives up a lot of equity that you have with either the Rockies, the Reds, or Houston, and those are kind of, or Philly, right? Like you can get so much more power out of a Philly stack. So those four teams, I think, are kind of the top tier. And then you're getting into these guys where that C tier is like, okay, well, they have upside, but do I really want to play them over the Reds? No. I can play them with the Reds. C tier is my secondary stacks. We'll put it that way.
Okay, then we have Verlander's in that list of, pitchers that are going to be kind of rostered today. But I'm not a big fan of playing bats against him. St. Louis Cardinals. They're one of the lower projected teams, but they're at least cheaper than some of the other teams. If Verlander was owned, maybe they're a D stack, but I'd almost rather play the Giants than play the Cardinals. And if that's the case, are the Cardinals an F stack today?
Cardinals are not an F stack. Do you know what Verlander's ground ball rate is over the last month?
I'm assuming it's very low.
18%. 18. He only had 6% ground ball rate in his last game across 7 innings pitched. He has always been a pretty high fly ball guy. And typically guys who throw an elevated fastball are higher fly ball guys. But this year it is to the extremes. Across the entire year, he only has a 23% ground ball rate. And in the more recent sample, he only has like an 18% ground ball rate. That's really, really low.
So is that the reason why I already have the Goldschmidt anytime home run at plus 500 on FanDuel?
Yep, that's why.
Yeah, I got that. Yeah, someone in chat is like, yeah, Goldie Homer. Yeah, plus 500. Yeah, I don't know if you could get that number anymore, but FanDuel it's plus 5. It was at least at some point.
Yeah, I think we go. I can go look at what DraftKings has up right now, just because that's what I have up. But
just because Verlander gives up some fly balls, that may be the case for playing 1 or 2 Cardinals, but to play 4 or 5 of them, you're still fine. wouldn't say they're a C stat. I mean, D at least. I mean, I don't think Verlander gives up 8-10 runs today or anything.
Hold on. Let me go look at some bullpen data here. Yeah, Houston's
their team
bullpen
total is low. I mean, their team total is what? It's
right, but I mean, like we're not considering them a 5-man stack. It's really a question of C or D. They're definitely not F. I think that D is fine. We'll throw them in D, but man, do I love Goldie. And I think that like a one-off from the Cardinals is a really, really good idea because Verlander's giving up.
Remember, James, this is a stack tier list.
I know. Well, that's why I'm trying to consider in the C tier is my secondary stacks, right? So I'm trying to consider if they are a secondary stack for me. I don't think they are, so I think you're right. It's a D.
Okay. Astros are a good team. Kyle Gibson, mediocre pitcher.
Yep.
The Astros have upside. I don't think people are gonna. They're expensive enough.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know. I'm always down with playing the Astros when they're not going to be popular.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I put them on the B tier, but I don't know what you think.
I'm fine with B tier. I think B tier is totally fine. They are one of the few teams that has like the power and consistency to match the upside that we get in Coors. Because remember, man, the Reds are not really that good or consistent right now. Ellie De La Cruz is hitting below the Mendoza line. He's 6,500. So that like there's no reason that we should think that the Reds are wholly more valuable than the Astros on like a baseline basis. I think they come in underowned, especially with how easy it is to get Coors and how easy it is to get these superstars from the Reds. I think you might see a difference in ownership between Yordan Alvarez and Ellie De La Cruz of like 20% or something. So I really like Houston here based on ownership, based on upside. I think Houston's a really good spot.
Would you say the same thing about the Phillies against Bryce Wilson?
I would. I absolutely would. I mean, the Phillies are the best offense in the league this year. Like I have no reason not to play them. And they're super expensive. And they take up all the priority positions, right? Like they take up catcher and outfield and shortstop and like third, like they take up every single priority. So again, like if you're not playing Coors, you're playing one of Houston or Philadelphia. That's just how I look at this slate.
Okay, no, I agree with you. How about on the low end, a vomit stack, the Tigers against the Evaldi?
I like the Tigers actually. Tigers are in a pretty good spot.
They can't be a C tier. I mean, they make it above the F tier, but I mean, who are you really gonna really play the Tigers today?
Nobody's gonna play them. As a secondary,
that doesn't make them that the fact that no one's gonna play them is not like a case to necessarily play, but like compared to some other vomit stacks, like I wouldn't put them in the F tier, but I mean, I can't.
I'll put them in the D tier. I will negotiate with you and put them in the D tier. I personally would put them in the D tier.
Okay. Then we have how about the Blue Jays against Grayson Rodriguez? The Blue Jays are almost always overowned.
Mm-hmm.
Even though there's a bad matchup, Grayson Rodriguez is going to be like the pitcher that's like squeezed out. So I don't think you get any leverage.
Nope.
Of playing that. So like to me, that's the quintessential F tier team of a team that's going to be that projects. They're not the lowest projected team on the slate. I mean, like they're plenty. The Tigers project lower, but the Blue Jays like are going to be. And what I mean by overowned is like they should be like 3% owned, and they're going to be 5% owned, and it's right. Like that difference makes a whole bunch of difference. And Grayson Rodriguez is going to be like 8 to 10% owned, and you don't get enough leverage there. So like. I put the Orioles, for instance, on the D tier against Gausman, even though the Orioles may not project as well as Toronto, only because Gausman is going to be way more owned than Rodriguez. Yeah. I wouldn't play either of these two teams in my single entry lineup or anything, but that to me, that's the reason why the Orioles get the D tier and the Blue Jays get the F tier, simply because of ownership considerations on the stack. I think the Orioles may end up being as owned as the Blue Jays, and you get more leverage by playing a team against Gausman than you do against Rodriguez.
Yeah, totally agree. I think that when I kind of look at the Blue Jays and the Cardinals as the same play today outside of ownership or outside of leverage offered. That's what I'm looking at here. I think that the Cardinals and the Blue Jays both are going up against pitchers that are not really going to be owned, but Verlander will be more owned than Grayson Rodriguez.
Yes.
So the Cardinals get that D tier, and I agree with you that the Orioles are somewhere between a C and a D tier, but they're so expensive that I just don't think I can put them into that C tier as secondary stacks. So I think I agree that has to be where Baltimore goes. It is worth saying that Baltimore is going to have. I do think Baltimore will be under-owned relative to where they should be based on the struggles that we know that Gossman can have and how high Gossman is going to be owned. But based on the price, it's just really, really hard for me to
Really tough. Yes, I agree with you.
So,
Last two teams facing the top two pitchers on the slate.
Yeah.
The Rangers against Skubal and the Brewers against Wheeler. I think Wheeler is going to be more owned than Skubal.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm not a big fan of playing Rangers against lefties either. So me personally, I put the Rangers as an F, and I put the Brewers as a D, only because if any pitcher on an 8-game slate that's going to be like 30, 35, or even more owned, the stack against them can't ever be an F tier, because if you could negatively correlate with a 2% owned stack against like the most owned pitcher, like that's the easiest leverage. Of course, it doesn't happen often, but I can never put that in the F tier. So do you agree with me, or do you think that Texas deserves D treatment, or the Brewers are just bad enough that they deserve F treatment? I don't think either of these are C tier. Would you agree that neither of these are C tier teams?
Yeah, Brewers are kind of the same as the Orioles here. Whereas I think that they are facing, Wheeler is very good, but I do think that he is kind of in a slump. We'll call it a slump for him right now. And the Brewers are, I think, a good team. And the only reason why I would put them into the C tier is because I think they are underpriced, right? The Orioles are expensive and the Brewers are affordable. So, but I think that D tier makes sense just because Wheeler is an ace and not somebody that we usually pick on. We can pick on Gossman. We don't ever usually really pick on Wheeler. So I think D tier makes sense. And then the Rangers, yeah, they just got to be an F tier. Skubal is arguably the best pitcher in the league this year. Like he's ridiculously good. And it's not like the Tigers bullpen is atrocious either. I mean, they're probably a bottom 5 bullpen, but they're not atrocious. They're not like the Rockies. So I couldn't justify having any stacks of Texas today, really. I don't see doing that. Even if I had like 100 lineups, I would not go.
Well, that's kind of our first look in the morning for the slate today. Do you have any? I know I mentioned a couple that I already have. Do you have Prize Picks, Underdog, any other bets that? I mean, obviously you have your own model, so you're not going off the bat like I am. Do you have something for pitching and something for hitting? Do you have one for pitching, one for hitting? And of course, the hitting ones, people love the home run props. Understand that home run props you should always use as a portfolio, right? They're going to be, I may have 8 to 10 on any given day, and a lot of times they're plus 1400s, they're plus 700s, they're plus, like, over time you have to judge them. And some days I have 8 of them and 4 of them hit on one day, and sometimes I don't hit one in 3 or 4 days in a row. Like that's why like the strikeout props for hitters or the hit props or the RBI props and everything, less exciting, but a little lower variance. So James, do you have a pitching prop and a hitting prop?
Yeah, I already hit it this morning. I was able to hit Taylor McGill at over 4.5 at negative 120. Negative 120, which I think was fine. I think it was out last night at negative 110, I think, but I missed it. I would bet that up to, you can take that when it flips to 5.5, if it flips 5.5 later on in the day, which I think that it might, like, I would still take it 5.5. I would ladder that all the way up. And then hitter prop, we have Hunter Goodman's over total bases, 1.5. We hit it at 115. It existed at 120 earlier today, but I hadn't been able to run models yet. So I think that Hunter Goodman over 1.5 total bases is where we're sitting on that.
What position do you have him in the order though?
9.
Oh no, wait. So he projects well even as the 9th hitter.
Yeah.
Okay. That's
so I'm fine with
for a lot of right. A lot of the batter props that aren't home run props, I typically don't take until some lineups start coming out because unless it's a situation like Goodman where he could only get better, right? Right. It's like when you're taking 9th hitters and it turns out they're going to bat 7th, like that only helps you, right? But it sucks when you take someone that is projected to bat 6th and they end up batting 9th. Like then all that plate appearance expectation goes away and your bet actually has a negative edge now. So like you have to be careful on the hitter props like that. But yes, if you have him projected 9th and you still have his over total bases to be profitable, sure. Seems like you're heavy on the Rockies today.
Yeah. If I do end up playing DFS, it's basically impossible for me to get off a Rocky stack. I think that's just where I'm going to be. And I pretty much only play single entry or three entry max. So like that would be pretty heavy for me. And then outside of that, like I said, I don't see myself paying up over Gossman. I just don't see a need to. I think Gossman plus one of Meagill or Waldron, probably whichever one is heavier owned, and then just stack up the Rockies and all the rest.
Okie doke. Well, we got Grinders Live and Crunch Time later tonight. So tune in 5 o'clock Eastern. 5 o'clock Eastern for that, then followed by Crunch Time. Roth will be there to give a weather update. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the notification bell to always know when we go live. Hit that thumbs up button on your way out the door. James, people can follow you at paydirt_DFS on Twitter.
Yep, paydirt_DFS. And if you want any of my projections or models, go to paydirtdfs.com. And there's a newsletter. That's a cool thing too. So go do those things.
And like I said before, if you want to learn more about the game theory of DFS, of daily fantasy sports, like the core concepts of strategy, go to theoryofdfs.com. We have a 15-hour audio DFS masterclass, as well as an additional 10 chapters for advanced players, right? Once you learn the basic concepts, then you go to the advanced concepts, which comes with custom Excel tools that you could use alongside Lineup HQ or SimLabs here on RotoGrinders. I mean, all the reviews for this has been amazing. It's been out for a while, but it still applies. This will apply as long as DFS exists. So it also will help you with your betting as well. I mean, think in terms of probability. Think what are projections, like very basic stuff, and then game theory, such as combinatorics and ownership and stuff like that. So you could you not build the worst lineups. If you have been struggling and you just want to at least be competitive with people that actually know what they're doing, definitely go pick this up. Theoryofdfs.com. I'll be back tomorrow. I don't know. I think Tim's on tomorrow. I'm not sure. Someone's on tomorrow. We'll be talking. It's baseball, right? Is there anything? We'll be talking about another baseball slate. Friday's always MMA. Wednesdays, I think I'm going to be on with Dean for Grinders Live, but it's baseball, MLB. Despite James hating baseball now, it's June 3rd. He's already sick of it. Despite that, it's still going to be all baseball this week. So tune on in as I talk about all things you're thinking about in daily fantasy props and pick 'em on RotoGrinders Today.